The first objective for Unit 6 is describe how the Manifest Destiny helped encourage westward migration. Americans have wanted to move west for a long time, and things like the Hudson School of Art, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, the Treaty of Greenville, Pinckney's Treaty, and the Louisiana Purchase made them want to move west even more. And since Joseph Smith was no longer around, Brigham Young made them go west. The Mormons were one of the first groups to move west because they wanted religious freedom because they were being persecuted in New York where they were originally. They went on what is known as the Mormon Trail. Another advocate for westward expansion is President James K. Polk. He wins the election of 1844, and he basically gives us the modern borders of the United States. He gets the Oregon Territory. With what was the Mormon Trail now becomes the Oregon Trail for people to migrate from where the Mormons were to go to Oregon. The 5440 or fight is what Clay negotiated on the 49th parallel. The second objective is describe the consequences and causes of the Mexican-American War. Since Mexico was still an upcoming country, it was a very easy defeat for the Americans, and they won the war within months. They gained what is now known as California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona. After that, they got the Gadsden Purchase, which was the tiny strip below where is known as New Mexico and Arizona, so the travel through the west could be easier to get to California. After this, it is discovered that there's gold in California and everybody wants it. So about 300,000 people move out west, and only 1% find gold, and only 1% of the 1% find enough gold to make a living off of it. Since the population was so dense in such a short amount of time, California was eligible for statehood within 1 year. And now with California being a new state, there is the problem of whether it should be a slave state or a free state. Wilmot Proviso tries to say that there is no slavery in the Mexican Cession, which does not last long because nobody listens to him. What comes is the Compromise of 1850 with Henry Clay and his new apprentice, Stephen Douglas. It says that California is a free state, but for the slave states, the Fugitive Slave Act is strengthened, which means that runaway slaves need to be returned or else it is a federal offense. Southwestern states will decide to be slaves or non-slave states by popular sovereignty, which ends up being better for the states because now they get to choose. And the slave trade ends in D.C., which makes the North happy because it's a large trading port. Sectionalism will arise from this, and the issue of slavery will just become even bigger. The third objective is describe how the events in Kansas increased sectional divisions. By now, the Great Triumvirate, they're all passed away, and the presidents are very weak during this time. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is brought up, which is that Kansas and Nebraska can decide to the issue of slavery between popular sovereignty, and it will end the 36-30 line, which will get rid of 30 years of peace that they had. Immediately, Nebraska decides to become a free state because it is in the north, and Kansas, it is up to Kansas to decide will the states be even or will the states be uneven, and that will arise some issues. This leads to Bleeding Kansas, which is a bunch of people rolling into Kansas, pretending to live there, trying to make the votes so it can either be free or slaves. This leads to about 29 dead in over a 3-month period over the issue of slavery, which is not good for America's economy. Another issue that happens is the issue of John Brown. He tried to plan a slave rebellion, but it failed and he got hanged. The North sees Brown as a hero standing up for what he believes in, and the South sees Brown as a terrorist, and they feel threatened by his attempt to have a rebellion. The fourth objective is describe how the issue of slavery divided the 3 branches of government. One issue that was in Congress was the gag rule, which was that if you don't talk about it, it isn't happening. So that's what they tried to do with slavery, is that they tried to not talk about it at all, for them to try to believe that there was no problem and there was nothing to resolve. Another issue in government was the Brooks-Sumner affair. Senator Charles Sumner made speeches about abolition and once called out Preston Brooks' relative, who was another senator in Congress. Brooks, while defending his relative's honor, beat Sumner with a cane, and it brings up issues in the South and the North. This brings up issues because Sumner, he stands up against slavery and is seen as a martyr, and Brooks is seen for defending his relative's honor and also the honor of the South, which creates more sectionalism within the country. In the judiciary system, Dred Scott versus Sandford is a big case that makes many problems arise with sectionalism. The Supreme Court decides that slaves are property and that cannot be changed. This deems the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional and to be replaced by the Kansas-Nebraska Act that was put in just a few years prior. People in the South will like this decision because now slavery is an opportunity for all states to have. With more problems arising in the government, the political parties started to get more advanced. It went from the Jacksonian Democracy and the Whig Party to the Democrats, the American Know Nothing, the Free Soil, and the Republican. To draw it out, I've helped you make a list, and here's the list starting from the original Federalists until the Free Soil, the Republicans, the American Know Nothing, who actually both came from the Whig and the Jacksonian Democracy because they're really just uneducated people that don't know what to side with, and the Democrats that came from the Jacksonian Democracy. Going with more problems, there was a Senate race in Illinois with Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln, who both wanted the Senate. They had a series of 7 debates, which created the basis of all the debates today that we see in the competitions. Douglas proposed the Freeport Doctrine, which basically disagreed with the entire basis of the Dred Scott versus Sandford case, and it became less popular as time went on. With Douglas bringing up the Freeport Doctrine, Lincoln created the idea of containment, which doesn't heal the problem of slavery, but it just says we're going to keep slavery in one place so it doesn't spread, but also we don't get rid of it and it keeps everybody happy. The state of Illinois basically came up with a compromise, which was electing Stephen Douglas as senator, but then using their electoral vote later to elect Abraham Lincoln in the race for president. The fifth objective is defend or refute the reasoning behind the Southern secession. The election of 1860 had 4 main candidates. It was Lincoln, Douglas, Bell, and Breckinridge. Lincoln's idea of slavery was containment, Douglas was opposed to slavery, Bell had the gag rule, and Breckinridge wanted slavery. With Lincoln winning the election, it created a slice in the Democratic Party. It was the Southern and the Northern. The Northerners believed in conservative, don't talk about slavery, and federal budget and government and debt. The Southern wanted popular sovereignty, and they wanted to talk about the issue of slavery. Even though Lincoln was not on half of the ballots that were passed out to the entire country, he still won the presidential election of 1860. This showed the really big idea of sectionalism and how it is splitting the country and leading to the Civil War. As the South tries to secede, the Crittenden Compromise is one of the last attempts for the Southern states to stay in the Union. It extends the 3630 line all the way across the United States to California. And though the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, it wasn't brought up. This failed by 1 vote, and if it had not failed, it would have stayed in the country until today because it was not able to be repealed or amended. The southern states were not happy that this didn't get passed through, and 11 states ended up seceding from the Union and creating the Confederate States of America. Those states were Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, South and North Carolina, and Virginia. From this, the border states that separated the Union from the Confederate States were West Virginia, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland. Even though they did not secede from the Union, these states were still free states, but they kept the Union together throughout the war. The Civil War begins in March 1861, and from this on, Lincoln's decisions are all for the border states and to try to keep them in the Union, because if he does not keep them in the Union, then it will lead to the downfall of the Union and the United States of America. The first battle of the Civil War was in Fort Sumter, South Carolina. It was the first shots, but there were no casualties except for one poor horse. Thank you for watching my crash course video on Unit 5 and 6. Like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.